In a world that walks the line, there's a rare few who think outside the box together for the crew. To break the equations, not bound to any rule. Exposing to the world the universe's own view. It takes the talent of the craftsman, it takes the mind of the fool, to make the vision realize energy and matter in a duel. To a break, to a duel.
Hello everyone, my name is Nathan, otherwise known as Old Man Builds, and we're here with Joe today, and we're going to talk Project Montauk. Joe, whenever you're ready.
Hey everybody, happy Saturday. Joe, disclaimer today, I don't necessarily believe and or endorse everything that I'm going to talk about today. There's definitely going to be a lot of fact mixed in with some speculation. And, I think it's always important for everybody to use their best judgment as to, what the actuality of it is. Some of the topics that we discuss are obviously, very speculative in general. And I don't think that this one is going to be much different. So without, any further ado, I just want to start off by saying that this topic is actually a little near and dear to me. I've grown up on Long Island my entire life, and lived basically within stone's throw of most of the places that we're going to be talking about today. And several of the locations that we're going to be talking about is only miles from where I currently live, which is very cool. So it's all very, close stuff, and kind of wanted to talk about it. So, where I wanted to start this off is somewhere that maybe a conversation on Montauk doesn't generally start, and where I'm going to start this conversation off is in 1901. Okay. So in 1901, Tesla started the construction of Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island in Shoreham, New York. All right. So we've discussed Wardenclyffe at length. It was Tesla's laboratory where, he was, looking to basically distribute free universal wireless energy to everybody. And that project obviously had gotten cut short and went unfinished amongst all of his other research that was done at Wardenclyffe, which was extensive, due to him getting cut off of funding, because the idea obviously would have crippled the power sector financially. So he lost his funding, couldn't finish the projects, ended up having debts he couldn't pay, and had to leave Wardenclyffe. Wardenclyffe was abandoned in 1906, and more or less sat untouched from 1906 to 1917, when his debtors finally came to try and collect on some of their losses. They did so by demolishing his tower in hopes that they would be able to salvage the materials from the tower in order to recuperate their losses. But what they ended up finding is that the tower and scrap itself was only worth like $1,700 in their money at the time, which maybe would have been like, $30,000 today, let's just say. Mm-hmm. But the amount of effort that they even had to put into bringing this tower down, breaking down all the pieces to be shipped out and so on, just simply wasn't worth it at all. So they abandoned trying to salvage any of the stuff, and all of his equipment more or less remained on the premises. Now, they did foreclose on the property, okay, in an as-is state, officially in 1922, and finally found a buyer for the property in 1925, a gentleman by the name of Walter L. Johnson, who was a Brooklyn native. He wanted to, try and also salvage Tesla's equipment for money from the, from Wardenclyffe. And he ran into the same exact troubles that everybody else had run into previous to that. They looked at the size and scale of the operation there, decided that there was no feasible way for them to be able to salvage Tesla's equipment and make their money back on the proposition. So Johnson sold Wardenclyffe in 1939 after holding it for a number of years to Plantcrest Incorporated. Okay, now here's where things start to get really, really interesting. Plantcrest Incorporated was owned as a holding company, okay, for housing development of rural areas by Fred Trump.
Oh,
So Fred Trump owned Plantcrest Incorporated and was a major holder in that acquisition of Wardenclyffe on March 6, 1939. Plantcrest had held the property for a number of months, and then Fred Trump had a connection back in Brooklyn of Peerless Photo Products Incorporated. Okay, and he ultimately struck a deal with Peerless to enter the property. Now, all of my research shows that Peerless operated in the Wardenclyffe facility. In fact, they were sued a number of times without any sort of regard for the historical value of the property itself. But one thing that was never ever mentioned was their removal of any sort of equipment from the property.
oh,
Okay, so by the time, again, now here's where your speculation could kick in. We know that all of the stuff wasn't worth it to salvage when it was sold to this other guy. Okay, and he did nothing with it. He sells it to Plantcrest. Okay, so presumably the stuff is there. Now, Peerless goes in there, and there's no mention of having to remove any of this equipment from the facility before they started their operations. Okay.
So it was all missing by the time the next people got there. So somebody took it.
Exactly. So by 1939, the equipment and everything Tesla related from Wardenclyffe is presumably gone from Wardenclyffe. So we'll fast forward a little bit. Tesla then passed away in 1943. Okay. And when Tesla passed away in 1943, as we all know, his trunks and all of his books and documentation was removed from his residence at the New Yorker Hotel and was more or less annexed to the Department of Defense for holding, at which time it was actually given over to John Trump, all of Tesla's records. Now, John Trump was an electrical engineer for the Department of Defense, United States military, prior to and during World War II. He held positions in Army research and development and specialized in high voltage engineering and radiation technologies. He was directly connected to MIT and again, the Department of the Army. So you have Fred Trump in possession of all of Wardenclyffe's contents,
yes,
presumably, in 1939. And then in 1943, you have John Trump's acquisition of the trunks of all of Tesla's work. Now, during that interim time before the end of World War II, John Trump was working as a consultant in the Manhattan Project due to his expertise in radiation and a lot of the, can't discuss it on YouTube, concerns regarding radioactive fallout and such. So once the war ended, the Manhattan Project was successful, they redirected their focus to establishing new ways to utilize these technologies. And in 1947, they had commissioned the construction of Brookhaven National Laboratory, which was exactly 5 miles straight line south of Wardenclyffe Tower, at an old U.S. Army base that was active during World War II and decommissioned. After World War II, Upton is the name of that. So they built the Brookhaven at Upton. Now, in the interim, before the end of the war, and this is backtracking a little bit, we had what's alleged to be the Philadelphia experiment. Now, I'll put it out there from the get-go. I feel like the story of Philadelphia experiment and then the story of Philadelphia experiment and how it tied to Montauk and all of these little things, I find that to be pretty bunk stuff, to be honest. That said, I think that they were playing with the technologies. I don't think that they were playing with the technologies where they said they were.
Gotcha.
When they said they were, and the results of which I think also were a little speculative. Okay. But as we go deeper down the rabbit trails of this, what you end up finding is connections between Philadelphia and Montauk. Now, it's not all that outlandish because, see, Tesla wasn't even, as far as like on the books is concerned, anything to do with what's speculated about Philadelphia, Tesla didn't have any direct correlation with. But it was all using Tesla's technologies that had been picked up on by, he was like, Tesla would have fit right into this group in the sense that, he would tell anybody, anything he knew, and all he wanted to do was do it. He knew the information. He didn't care so much the information as much as he did getting it done himself and having his dreams realized, which was where he was thwarted. So, he being a bit, slightly naive maybe or something, like he would go into these good faith conversations with people, thinking that, well, if I could just convince them that what I'm telling them is correct and real, then they're going to help me because they're going to realize the significance of it. But what it ended up being is he ended up just giving away the goods to a lot of different people that never had any intention of giving him a damn thing, which was cause of his ruin, I suppose. But so the information was out there. It was known. He had talked to all sorts of different people about all sorts of different stuff. And without bouncing around too much, although when you're talking about something that alleges time travel, it's very hard not to do that.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, right. I mean, how do you talk about something that took place in 3 different decades simultaneously without bouncing around, I guess? But supposedly what what's his name? I can never remember the guy's name. Preston Nichols, the guy that wrote the books. Okay. What Preston Nichols was saying is that when they did Philadelphia, they did it 100% right with the exception of one thing, and it was frequency based. And what they did was they pushed it just a little too far. See, what the goal of Philadelphia apparently was to enter the whole entire ship into a state of resonant frequency.
Okay.
That was in between 2 points, like basically just short of like Planck's distance on it, the way that they were putting it, in between 2 points. And as long as they remained in between the 2 points, they would travel in time linearly with time as it is. So when you were looking there, the ship wasn't really there. You couldn't see it from the outside perspective. That's what they were aiming to do. But apparently what they did was they pushed it just a little too far. And once you busted over Planck's distance, then you just ended up in obscure time space where it's going to be linked. Now, what he claimed was that there was a link every 20 years. So the way that the cycle goes is that every 20 years on the certain date, you'd have an opportunity to re-enter that same time spiral.
Oh, that'd be cool. Okay.
Yeah. So, if it disappeared in 43, that means that in 63, they had an opportunity to reconnect, so to speak, with Elridge and floating dimensional time space, and in 83, the same exact thing. So, apparently when they broke the device and it got thrown back into 3-dimensional reality, according to whatever they're saying, that's when everybody got welded up into like panels of the ship and stuff, is because everything was in a fluid state. So if you wanted to think about the people on board the ship itself, etc., they're all independent entities but all of the same fluidity, viscosity. So you could pass right through a wall because, well, water does that, right?
Yeah.
Right.
What's crazy is if people can pass through walls, then what happened to the ocean beneath them? I mean, did that come into the ship? Did it stay out of the ship? Did the thing form a bubble around it? I mean, how does that all work?
You got me there. Again, I mean, I've thought about these things too. In fact, I think I posed a similar question to myself at one time. And the whole thing just feels like really bunk to me. So like I just kind of cut myself off from going down that trail too far. You know?
stay with the what the story is and not try to figure it out.
Right. So it's like I don't think that it wasn't possible. And I'm not saying something like that couldn't happen. I just don't think it happened to that ship in the way that they said it did. You know, now that I'm pondering it, I mean, I would say that probably water, like maybe the surrounding immediate, like whatever is in the immediate field, you know, that's conductive would probably be included to a degree with a certain amount of diffusion, the same as any other bubble. You know, you're going to have a point of diffusion where it's like, you know, less floating water, you know, as it goes on, I suppose. But I think that the field that was created was primarily on the steel of the, you know.
Yeah, well, it could have just been that it wasn't the people were right in the center of everything. So they were, how do I say this, way too close to it than what they should have been, where the water wouldn't be at that point. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
They're in ground zero for this whole thing. So everything bad happens at ground zero. So that would probably be my thought on it. They were just too close to something, and then that's where everything loses what it is, you know, the molecules and everything. And then, yeah, passing through stuff, if you put too much power into it one time or you switch the frequency too fast, that would be absolutely insane. Yeah, I could see that kind of stuff happening.
Yeah, so I mean, more bunk, and but to do with that, and you know, you could plug and play this as you wish, but again, sounds bunk to me. You know, in the Tale of Montauk, you know, you're dealing with Al Bielek and Cameron Duncan, you know, who supposedly were on the ship, and both of them, well, one of them had jumped off the ship, thinking that jumping off the ship into the blackness that was described, you know, would ultimately just land them in the water back in Philadelphia. But evidently, jumping off the ship just spit them out in 1983. In, you know, in Montauk. That's how that story went. That was the connection that the story of the Montauk project, as it was told, you know, by yeah, I should really write down his name because like I've known this guy
Al
for 20
Bielek,
years. Not Al Bielek, no.
not that guy.
Yeah, the big guy. Anyway, the guy that wrote the books. All right. That like, you know, he was spit out into the same timeline then as that. And then he had to like go back and get Cameron Duncan, his brother.
Oh yeah, okay.
So that's like how the story all went. It just sounds like a load of you know, horse malarkey to me. But that all said, you know, this is how they're trying to tie Philadelphia to Montauk. Now, I could tie Philadelphia to Montauk in a way more coherent fashion, you know, just by realizing that they are attempting to utilize Tesla tech in 43 after Tesla's death. Okay. With a direct connection to US military intelligence through John Trump.
Yeah, let's get back to that. What about the Trumps being involved in this?
Well, I mean, you know, this is not a political cast at all, but I want everybody to use their judgment. The thing that I'm telling you about the Trumps is none of that is bunk. Okay, that's all stuff that happened, like the affiliations. Now, you could speculate what happened to Tesla's equipment at Wardenclyffe, but seeing as you have a real estate guy hunting out a random, piece of Tesla property on Long Island where there's nothing developed and nothing residential was ever developed, bought by a man who his father is in U.S. military intelligence as an electrical engineer, like that, listen, things are only so convenient on this planet.
Yeah.
If you think about convenience in your own life, you have to move every little thing just so you know where it is. Things are inherently inconvenient. You have to make them convenient,
Yeah.
So just that fact alone doesn't ring as a coincidence.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So we got Philadelphia experiment happen. Okay. We got the Trumps involved in the real estate financial stuff of it. And then we got Tesla stuff right now that we don't know who has it, but we know the experiments are starting to happen. So now let's roll right into the Montauk.
Yeah. So, when it comes to Montauk, my summation is this. And, again, this is a culmination of just random bits of information that I've gotten from all over the place. Okay. That I'm culminating into kind of my own story of it. All right. So again, make of it what you will. But what I suppose happened, okay, is that there was some correlation between John Trump and the establishing of Brookhaven National Laboratory. Okay, that John Trump used his MIT affiliations to have collaborative effort with Brookhaven to do R&D on Tesla tech at Brookhaven. That that the purposes for their R&D there were actually pretty good. Okay, like it was like good intention stuff, like radiology equipment and things of that nature, but I think that they got to a certain point in R&D at Brookhaven where Brookhaven was also dabbling in nuclear physics as well. Okay, and they were also had direct affiliation with Grumman. Okay, so they were in R&D with Grumman.
Really?
Yeah, I think that something was found at one point in time or another, okay, that became a little bit more nefarious as far as like what the implications of the findings of the tech were suggesting. And I think that it became one of these situations where you could no longer ask Congress for funding for those types of operations. Right now, one thing that I think went astray, okay, also ended John Trump's relationship and career within this field in the 60s. Okay. He was into bioradiology. Okay. So we get what that is. It's MRIs, it's that type of diagnostic type stuff. Okay, equipment. When they were doing that, I think they found stuff within those high power input frequencies, those tunnels and things like that that they were making that had those darker implications that they could no longer say this is what we're researching. Mm-hmm. And because it was a national lab, connected to an institute, they removed the project from Brookhaven and moved it out to Montauk in probably like the late 70s, early 80s, but definitely by 1983. Now, it was critical that they were set up in 83. Okay, because if you remember something about the story, it happened in 43. The wormhole came back around in 63, but they missed it because they didn't have it going by 63. They had 20 years between 63 and 83 to figure it out to be able to do this intercept.
Gotcha.
Now, once they did that intercept, supposedly, again, bunk if you will, but this is the timeline that's kind of spelled out here, Montauk was up and running as a black budget operation. They picked that location not only because of its proximity to Brookhaven, okay, but also because it's secluded and at the end of the island with only the Atlantic Ocean surrounding it. Okay, it had been closed off to the public since World War II as a military base through Camp Hero. It was an Air Force facility that housed a radar tower as well as artillery. All right, so it had all the secure stuff. Plus, it was all set up with the radar tower. A lot of those electronics were actually provided by Grumman, through the development with Brookhaven already. So a lot of the tech was already there, and they were able to seamlessly move the operation, which was being handled under Project Phoenix, under continuation of Project Montauk. And that's supposedly because now this is where things go crazy, is all the stuff on Montauk. Now, there's nothing declassified about this project. It is not a confirmed project. You have the obvious book writing sellers of this, but the thing about that whole thing is that if you actually ever watch the guys, I mean, Nathan and I were watching it before, it's dry, it's boring. You have to be like top tier, wanting to know the information and nothing else to be able to actually sit through and get through his presentations. But what is it packed with? Packed with all the same exact stuff that we talk about on this channel every single day. Yeah. And he goes into all the circuitry, and he goes into all the coil arrays, and he's got some very interesting, fascinating, and consistent coil array stuff that they were supposedly using in Montauk that all uses sacred geometry, all uses different macro geometries as well, which is super fascinating. This is how you make it bigger. So you have smaller you have smaller like sacred geometry type coil systems that then go linear into a macro shape that's consistent with the resonance of what he's building. And this is what he's describing. It's wild. So you know that the guy knows what he's talking about. Yeah. So this is when you end up in this situation where you're throwing your hands up in the air and going, well, what's real, what's not? Because the electrical engineering portion of this all makes pretty decent sense.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, though, that guy, either tape your eyelids open or just put it on mute and read the writing on it, because the guy's voice will put you to sleep. Oh, it's a whole mind control thing right there. It's like totally to put you into a trance or something, probably. That guy, man, oh, that was bad. So
yeah, he's dry, and he's also kind of rude too, which is a whole nother story. Like, if you watch this stuff, like, he doesn't take well to any sort of like question that with any sort of criticism at all. Like, he gets kind of pissy. Yeah, so that's sort of like, some of the connections that I drew. But what I find to be like interesting in today's, excuse me, Preston Nichols, by the way, that was his name, right? Now, what I find to be kind of interesting is some of our modern Trump's policies and stances when it comes to certain technologies, certain industries, certain energy needs, and things like that, and how he calls out a lot of the green energy people as just, this is a waste, this is total nonsense. Yeah. And then you see ultimately who's jumping on the bandwagon with him other than Elon Musk, who literally owns a company called Tesla, who has created his whole entire, existence on furthering these technologies that, Tesla was researching 100 years ago. And now you have this new collaboration taking place in the modern era. And, then you see the reaction of society around, or society, what am I saying? Political society around it being up in arms and enraged because, this is what happens when you potentially have two people who know, They know the quiet part,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not okay with the quiet part.
No.
They're not okay with the quiet part. They don't want the quiet part to be quiet, you know. But summation of this is, I really think that you know, John Trump, who was trying to do a good thing, you know, they basically took the good thing, realized its, you know, nefarious side, and ended up going that route with it, you know, without his involvement, obviously, you know,
Yeah.
going that route with it.
Well, a lot of that stuff, really high frequency stuff, once you get past the microwave and stuff, it gets into a whole different level. So once you start bringing dishes in that size, you can start manipulating a lot of stuff throughout the air. So based on your frequency that you put into it, you could change quite a bit of stuff, including your own mind on some of this stuff. You know what I mean? And if they just strap people to a little chair and they started to get into mind reading or projection, stuff like that, then we're really talking something heinous could happen in that.
Yeah, for sure. You know, there's so much. Yeah, I'm trying to tread lightly on it because of YouTube, but
Yeah.
I mean, let's put it this way. You know, when you're talking about those energy levels, okay, and the fact that they have what we're discussing, you know, what we're discussing on a daily basis, they already got that pinpointed, figured out, no problem. Okay. You know, if they're able to tear holes in time space, you know, and then also use mental manipulation and coherence to like sync people's mind with this blank zone, you know, that's where they were saying like the Montauk chair and stuff like that. And it sounds wacky as all could be, you know, where they're thinking things out of basically a hole of nothing. But then when you realize all of the different energies that are going into creating this portal, what those energies are capable of in terms of matter production, okay, and in terms of thought, coherence, and things along those lines. I mean, all of a sudden, like it makes you start to kind of wonder, you know. I mean, the end of the project supposedly went something to the effect of like, you know, they were doing some real nefarious things down there, like very, very bad CIA stuff, you know, and you know, not all of it was necessarily consensual, you know. The long and short was apparently one guy that they had who was excellent at the Montauk chair and manifesting things out of a portal decided enough was enough. He set all the people up and he basically wished a monster out of the hole that just started wrecking the whole entire place. I mean, and this is where it goes, woo, you know, and crazy and stuff. But
Well,
then you hear like the resident accounts of immediately after the place was vacated, it was filled up solid with concrete, every single hole to the very top, to the point where they were dumping concrete in tunnels for months, one truck after the next, day after day. And I've been there myself before. I've walked through by where the bunkers are, and there's trails through there. Anybody could do it. It's, you know, you could just walk right through there. And there's random manhole covers dead in the middle of the woods. Okay. And the tops of the manhole covers all have concrete pouring out of the tops. You know, there's no necessity to fill up an entire, you know, underground tunnel. Like, you just need to make it not accessible. It's easy enough.
Yeah. Well, so let's take this in a different way then. So you have Montauk that happens, right? And regardless of what you think about it and all the, how do I want to say this, medical we can't talk about on the show, but now you just talk frequency and mind manipulation and how the government is doing it now. White noise, background noise, FM radio background noise. Everything comes out with a frequency on top of everything else, but it's something that you necessarily can't hear in general, but it's always in the background. Okay. Then we start talking about they bring out their big Jeep and then they have this sound thing that'll make you sick. And they can change it to any frequency, make you feel like you're drowning. It'll make you sick. You know what I mean? Things like that. And it kind of makes you go back a little bit and say the master of resonance was Tesla. Every bit of it ties back to him. Not that he's involved in it, but his research would develop everything here if you start playing with it. And it kind of tells you that the government wasn't ever going to let it go. So whatever happened there, they were doing something a little bit more.
Oh yeah, and it's some of it is the quiet part out loud, because not all of this stuff is undisclosed to the public at this point. They have all of these arrays of where they basically are microwaving people, at a distance, causing them like real discomfort to turn back, and they have those arrays out there in deployment. Then there's the brown note. You forgot that one, right? Right, all the whole 9 yards. And then people crapping themselves because you just playing that frequency that your intestines are at. It's crazy stuff. Then and I'm not going to say the second word, but the Havana,
Yeah. Well, just please don't take this the wrong way, but when you start to look at stories about this kind of stuff and you start talking about resonances and stuff, right? And you can even go back to the Bible and look at the Ark of the Covenant. You're still getting the same thing. There's a resonance frequency going on that's making people sick. You know what I mean? It causes all kinds of problems, and it looks like a nuclear fallout, but it's not. It's the resonance in your body that's uncontrolled in different frequencies, and it's just destroying you from the inside.
Yeah. Now, no matter what you believe, they say that they had it in Ethiopia or have it in Ethiopia, and every single priest that is tasked with, being the watcher and keeper of the ark knows he's signing his own, death warrant, because no matter how young or well they are, they all follow and fall into the same state of I'm trying to again dance around it, but they become unwell, and they ultimately perish within 5 years.
Yeah.
But they all have the same type of breakdown of symptoms, atrophy, blindness, things of that nature. They all go blind. They get thick cataracts, lesions, the whole 9 yards.
Which basically means it's uncontrollable unless you have the device to turn it off. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Somebody didn't turn this thing off. They took it active and left somewhere and didn't turn it off. Thankfully, at least the stuff that they have for the government, they shut it off so that, it doesn't keep
proximity,
happening.
It's not like inside of a small, tiny, mud building or whatever in the middle of the desert that you're standing inside there with.
Well, that, and they probably do not understand it's an electrical device. It's a spiritual device to them, and they don't realize ground it. Just simply ground it and let everything shoot into the ground. If it's a big capacitor, then you want it to discharge to the ground. I mean, for God's sakes, they had wooden poles that held the thing up. You know what I mean? And then you need to ground it. And I don't think that they understand it. I'm sure some do. But there's a lot of this stuff, man, that you could take care of by just dumping it into the ground. That's how Steinmetz did it. He said, okay, I don't want this frequency, this one, or this one, and I don't want this energy or this energy. So I'm going to simply dump it into the ground while I use everything else. That's what he did.
A couple of, I see, and I'm going to tread lightly again on this well, first of all, those Ethiopian brothers, they should, take the cross and make it an ankh. First off, because, maybe if they did that the right way, maybe something would help them out. But aside from that, how am I going to say this? All right, we're going to have to get back to it because there's no way to dance. So,
well, let's just see it this way too. If you're messing with somebody's psyche by using resonance, right? Then what other thoughts can you put in there? If you understand the frequencies and what they do, you just decide which one you want to put in there, and that's it. If they're making you feel like you're underwater, well, that's one frequency, okay? And it's got to resonate. Then if they feel like you're on fire, well, that's another thing, right? So how much mind control can they do to somebody if they just play them like they're playing in a band? You know what I mean? One right after the other, get your whole mind to go any which way they want.
Yeah, it's very true. You know, I mean, with that, when you're talking about such high resonant frequencies and stuff, you know, one way to think about it is, you know, there's the possibility of some mental and spiritual frequencies that may be achievable, you know, that may not be sustainable for your biological self too. You know, so like it's very possible that being in proximity and actually getting into resonance with that might be very spiritually, you know, ascending, you know, but at the same exact time, your biology isn't going to hold up.
Yeah, well,
You know,
it kind of goes to where we're going now in how do I say this? They want to get to anti-gravity and stuff. They want to use high frequency, and it's just the wrong answer. And it always has been. You have to find a different type of energy. And I always say that to people because once you get up past the microwave energy and you start getting to those gigahertz, it's frying human bodies. It's turning you inside out. It is not a good way to go. And it's just the wrong way. That all the shielding you would need, everything else, when you can just bring the stuff to the right kind of energy. You need a cold energy. And you need to understand it as the inverse of the high frequency now. So low frequency, high voltage. And if you can get that, you're set. But the earth itself creates that. So now you're going to have to figure out what type of energy is in the earth. And once you do that, it becomes very easy. But you're not going to get there with higher forms of microwaves or what comes beyond that. You're just going to obliterate people.
yeah. You know, it's actually interesting because that kind of connects to what you and I were talking about on the back end the other day. You know, we had been talking about pyramids and all that last week, and we always talk about pyramids anyway, but it occurred to me after talking, you know, on the show with Faraday, with Mike Faraday, that there's some pyramids that are buried, and then there's other mounds and stuff like that are just earthen mounds that are something under it that's creating a pyramid shape that are man-made, you know, and all of that just rang as like, you know, organite, and the organite cell like Mike had, you know, so the, you know, when you're talking about earth energy and what that earth energy is, that organite is the earth energy, you know, so when you're turning the ground itself into a capacitor, you know, through its natural processes of just, you know, organic and inorganic materials mixed together, layered up on something that's going to, you know, act as a conductor, you know, you're going to get exactly those types of earth energies that you're talking about. But like Mike also said, it's almost gaseous in its nature, you know, how it acts. It's not the same as you know, a free charge that you could necessarily make usable in the most in the sense like we use other forms of energy as far as like storing and propagating. So
Well, it also makes it easier to it makes it easier to understand because you have to take away AC and DC and just throw them out the window. Okay, those are man-made. We don't want those. Now you want to get into earth meat. You talk about piezoelectricity, things of that nature. That's all made by the earth, by resonance chambers, resonance cavities. They hit the resonance frequency of the crystal. All of a sudden you get everything that happens, right? Of course, we were talking the other day about the crystal itself has one magnetic side. It also has a side that's the best for your frequency. That means that there's a resonance side to it. It also means that it's going to scale on the harmonics of it. So you're going to get all these different patterns that are put into it. It's a geometrical shape in itself. So we're always talking winding wires and coils. It's already wound. It's already done. That shape is already in there. So you start to wonder, okay, we go back to all these places and you go, well, they use the earth itself. They use the rocks. They use the crystals. They use other than that. And they start talking about anti-gravity back in the old days. And it's like, you start to understand this if you understand the patterns. Everything works in a continuous pattern over and over and over again. It's not going to change. You just have to recognize the pattern. Well, that's the pattern with the crystal right there. It's creating everything that you want to know about it already that you're trying to build in another form of your coil. And all you have to do is recognize it and then know how to activate it. And we were talking about that because the Ark of the Covenant had that plate that the priests wore, and every single one of them had a jewel on it, and every one of the jewels lit up. And depending on which frequency and everything you put into it, but it couldn't just be one, it couldn't be just a frequency, because we could put frequency into crystal, we don't get them to light up. Couldn't just be the magnetics of it. We put a magnet next to it and put it on the right side of it. It's still not lighting up. We have resonance cavities and things with it. It's still not lighting up, but we know all three of them are in there. So,
okay. And I went down this rabbit hole a little bit before, but I just don't know the information at the top of my head. I think that now that you're mentioning it in this regard, it just kind of sparked like something I should take a look into and do and just be like, yeah, well, here it is, everybody. But on that plate, I think there were 12 different, for the high priest, it was 12 specific stones in a specific order, cut in a specific fashion,
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I remember making the connection of at the time was that each of those different stones, in their crystalline form, they all had very specific and different lattice structures. Now, that was as far as I went with it. But what I think would be the more interesting thing would be to actually chart it out with each crystal in its sequence and then see what the lattice structure of each of them is, see what their geometry generally is, and then see how that culminates as a whole. To see what the rhyme to the reason of the sequence and the order is, and to see what the variation is. And in some of them, there might be, I don't want to say a code, but we could call it that for purposes of this. Like let's say you're dealing with, a 5-pointed lattice of quartz, and then a 6-pointed lattice of the sapphire, and then an 8-pointed lattice, just so on and so forth. There might actually be a numerical association with each of these in sequence.
Yeah. Well, you get different harmonics from every single one of those.
Yeah.
So whether you be on the 5th harmonic and then you get an octave out of every one of them as well, just based on the actual geometrical structure that you're talking about for each one. And the reason that you cut any kind of crystal, just so we all know, is one side is frequency. So if you don't cut it the right way, you won't get the correct frequency out of it. So if you cut it in the wrong direction or opposite the grain, you probably won't get the frequency out of it. That's why they specifically cut these things the right way in order to do that. So if they're telling you that there's different cuts of it, you should really start to listen and what it is that you're looking for. Because then it's also going to say, okay, this is the best way to get the magnetic side out of it. Because sometimes it's not always easy to find. But if you take a strong neodymium magnet over a piece of quartz and you have all the angles cut on it, you can find that magnetic side fairly easy, and it'll start to push that piece of quartz.
Now,
So,
the draw another connection for you. If you think there's no relevance, why do you think the Orthodox and Hasidic JEWS, are literally they're the ones that acquire all of the precious stone, stuff for distribution, and any type of high-end stone that you're going to, they also cut them. And that's their industry. They call it jewelry trade.
yeah. Well, it also makes you wonder about the crowns for every king. Every single one of them has jewels in it. Were they meant to be a certain type of jewel? Well, it's sitting inside of gold. Gold is a great conductor, and it'll actually have properties in it for magnetics and stuff. But it also could be transmutating as each single one of them is hitting at the right frequency and everything else. Is there something that turns that on? They used to talk about when Queen Elizabeth was getting married and stuff under the actual throne, there was a box placed under there, and nobody knew what it was. But could it be that? Yeah. So could it be something activating jewels in the crown? It's an interesting concept. I don't know if it's true, but it's an interesting concept.
Now, it's easy to write off the importance of precious metals, precious stones, and things of that nature. It's just, well, they're rare and they're beautiful. And when something's rare and beautiful, and then also takes a skilled hand to make into something exquisite, that's going to have some sort of inherent, value just based on that alone. And of course, I think that would be objectively true. But when you're talking about just human beings in general, gravitating toward, things that are easily found in nature and so on and so forth, what I think you'll find is that there's very little documentation, if at any, of peasantry holdings of these easy enough to find natural materials. And that should say something to you, because yeah, it's rare, but it's not impossible to find, and yet like you could almost conclude that they probably just weren't allowed to have it, in their holdings, and that if they did, it would probably be secretive,
Well,
and then it leads to all this underground stuff around it too, which is just a whole nother offshoot of it. But like, yeah, you could find a sapphire on the ground, but yet if you're a peasant, you don't have sapphire. Why?
Well, I'll say it like this: when you look at a mandala, right, and you start to realize if each one of them, and you could break it down, so you get this round mandala, and then you take the heads on the outside if it's a Christian one, and there's different angels on the outside, right? Well, if those are the points in which you need to connect everything, so those would be the outside of the actual geometry. Then you connect each one of them in a certain pattern, and that's probably the pattern that would go on the inside on the structure of it, right? You're going to start to realize that they were trying to transfer information to something or someone who, when they were ready. So medieval times, they weren't ready to understand it. Okay. Maybe, I don't know, 200 years ago, they weren't ready to understand it. We're in an age now where we're technologically advanced enough to understand it. And that's what I'm trying to get at here. They put all the patterns in there, and they took them and put them as religious artifacts or things that were important. And we didn't understand it at the time. And we just took it as something that looks pretty, like jewelry or something. But it actually has a significant value in how everything's supposed to work. So now that when you look back on it and you go, well, can I make a structure that follows that mandala? And then what you're going to find is the most ironic thing. If you start with a shape, then you make the energy flow pattern. How is it actually flowing through that shape? Well, then you start to get what you would see the seed of life. Then You move to the next level of it. What is it actually producing? Well, it's starting to produce toroid fields, and it's starting to create vortexes. When you have a toroid field that moves in one direction, you then are swirling it, so then you're creating a vortex. Then you start adding to that. Okay, well, where does it go next? Well, we know that there's resonance involved in it, so you're creating a resonance pattern on top of it. This is all put in there right on top of this mandala, one level right after another, and you're looking at it and you can't discern it right away because you don't know it's there. But as soon as you start to understand how these things work, you start to see it. Now, you go, okay, well, how does it work when you put frequency in there? Well, does it make an F sharp? Does it make, a different octave in it? And then you get into the Russell scale and you start looking at it. Well, if it's a vortex, then I could start to understand. Now I have this scale that tells me how to transmutate things if I'm in a vortex surrounded by magnetics. And you're going, okay, this is kind of creepy now because now it's starting to make too much sense not to be right. And you start to transmutate. So when you get to the bottom layer of this thing, it's going to be one kind of animal that comes out of it, right? Because you're also going to overlap it with the medical, and that whole scale works together. So at one level, animals would be different. At another level, they'd be different again. They transmutate again when you get to the higher levels until you finally get to the surface where everything comes out, and then they're completely different. So if you can look at it that way, you start to see a unifying bond. This right here is exactly what you need to understand is the technology that they had in the past. They wrote it in everything that they did. Now we start to see it in the future. We now are starting to really understand technology. This is what they meant. Your civilization was not ready. Now our civilization is ready. It's now starting to understand this stuff. We understand how things work in a lab. We can start to put the pieces together. We can start to see where things fit. What happens when you start to resonate things? What happens when you start to build fields? What type of energies are you getting? That's why a lot of these experiments are very important, because you're going to find all this stuff is actually in one device in the end. And it could be as simple as a crystal. It could be as complicated as several layers of intricate patterns on a simple coil. But all of it matters in how you build it. You can get into all your physics if you want. It's going to fall right in line with it. None of this stuff is out of the line with it. It's simply that we didn't understand which parts to put together, which things did we want to look at? Do we understand the math of it? Do we understand that geometry plays a much bigger role in all of this than it would be a algebra equations where everything equals? Because it's not going to equal. It's going to be producing something. So it's interesting to understand it in that way. That's the way I understand it. And I'll say this, we do a presentation tomorrow on Gerald's coil. Please understand this, that geometry structure he has is very significant in everything that we're talking about here. So, man, tune in, because it'll really blow your mind when you start to put the patterns together and see how this thing is working. It's a whole unit. It's not just one thing. And every bit of proof that you've ever wanted in your experiment to bring it into the light is right there. That's the most insane part. It's all right there. Every field runs the right way. Everything shows you that it's rotating and counter-rotating, north and south pole. You have in there also the heat and cold of everything. Hot on the outside, cold on the inside. The inside pulls in more energy from the surrounding atmosphere. It's an unbelievable experience when you actually see this thing the right way and you understand why it's put together that way. So,
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, you know, and I have been for a long time. I think everybody has. Here, hold on. So
Well, now that you understand it, it's going to be really frying your mind on how he did it. Nobody can see that.
nobody can read it. Son of a bitch. Never went. There we go. Hello, my name. Anyway,
You know, the funny thing is he actually dropped the information. If you listen to that interview and you cut out all the garbage and all the hee-haw, you get down to the simple thing. He told you there was going to be a frequency that's much lower. It's going to have a lot higher energy in it, and it's going to be cold. You know what I mean? We could say all we want about Jack, but he told you right then and there. And when he tells you you don't have it, it's because he's seeing already that you're in the wrong direction. When you start going up to the microwave levels of this, you're going the wrong direction because you have to get the energy of the earth, or energy there's the inverse of what it is in the atmosphere of Earth. So,
yep.
Sorry, but Jack already told you, and we didn't listen. Instead, we just took away that we're all
I
schmucks.
didn't go back and listen to it. I did recall a lot of what he said, and after you said that, I kind of sat down and picked a couple of parts out of it too, where I was like, you know, okay, he's just angry.
Yeah, well, I went back through it and I brought it into the editing studio, and I cut out all the other stuff. I do this a lot, guys, just so you understand. I'll pull out the garbage part, all the part where people talk over each other and it makes no sense. Throw that away. Okay. Any stupid questions, throw those away. And we get down to the heart of it. There's information there that people subconsciously put out there. They don't realize that they gave it away, but they did. So people like me find it. We look in there and we cut things apart and look for it. And there's a reason to do that. Sometimes they'll start talking about a different inventor. And you go, well, I don't like that inventor, so I'm going to automatically comment and disagree with that inventor, right? Okay, but did you stop and learn something about the rest of it of what he said? Or was your whole thing of watching that video about that inventor you disliked? Well, cut that out. We're going to eliminate that because it's useless information. We get into what was the actual project that the guy was working on for that inventor, not what was the inventor. Sometimes an inventor makes 2 different projects or 5 or 10. So one of them's good. The rest of them could be garbage. So let's look into the invention itself. What is it? Let's isolate that and let's verify that information on that invention. Then let's pull it aside. You see, when you look at all these things, everybody gets preoccupied in their brain. They don't focus very well. And what happens is you start to look at the useless instead of the useful information. That's why you slice and dice and pull it apart and you reverse engineer it. Let's go to what he actually did versus what he's saying. Now let's cut out all the useless garbage. I ran this on my channel once. We're talking about the gravity flyer, and the inventor talked about, I think, 15 different inventors. And all the comments in the comment section were disagreements about the inventors he talked about. Then I went through and I cut out all that garbage. And I simply drew pictures of what he was talking about. And it made perfect sense because all the garbage was gone. So I'll just tell you that when you're doing this kind of stuff, you have to look at that. Some of this stuff, the traditions that go with it are sometimes great. Sometimes they're useless garbage. And you have to decipher when it comes to technology, which one you follow. So it's up to you guys and how you want to see it. I just see it a certain way because the technology fits one right on top of the other. And when I start looking at patterns and stuff, I always see different ones and I can discern what's junk and find the pattern in everything. And that's how, you know what I mean? I figure it out anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And, you know, I always like having conversations with people I don't necessarily see eye to eye with. Because I mean, personally, I get more out of that than just having like, you know, a wet noodle conversation with somebody who's just going to say, yeah to everything I have to say, you know. Not being challenged is not only boring, but it's not productive, and if you put on the blinders and go to everything that you at face value don't think you agree with, then I mean, where do you expect to get out of that? It's one thing to have the conversation, engage in it, play devil's advocate in it, and then at the end kind of rehash it in your head and see what you could pick through and make sense of, and that's good and productive. But to just shut it out entirely and then just not have a discussion at all, and even if you don't agree with it, that's silly. And who are you doing good in that situation? And moreover, when people tend to engage in that stuff, they tend to get upset, offended, and angry, or whatever, and then they become argumentative and whatnot. And it's like, how is that at all productive? That I don't really know at all. But yeah, man, it's a really crazy thing. Backtrack a little bit. We were talking about all this stuff because you went down a really good hole before we went into Jack, that I wanted to throw something in.
Oh, it's a giant rabbit hole.
The whole thing about it all coming together and this and that, and I got to tread lightly again because of whatnot. But welcome to esotericism of the occult. That's what it is. Like when you go to a cathedral, for instance, or I don't want to say the other word. I think I'll stick with cathedral. All right. That was purposefully and meaningfully built with its harmonics the way that it is, with its stained glass the way that it is, with its golden chalice the way that it is, and all these things, and then you bring groups of people with their energy and common core belief together, and now they're all speaking the same word. The people that are there, they get something out of that. They do, but this is the difference between the esoteric and the exoteric. The person that's at the altar in that circumstance, that's the person that's getting the energy. It's being drawn through them, and some of it may be given back, but it's that person performing the ritual that's at that one point at that altar. That altar isn't there on accident in this building that was entirely thought up of all of these harmonic properties and stained glass with light shining through it at certain times of the day, certain times of the year, certain windows, certain colors, certain shapes, all made out of certain geometries. None of the stuff is on accident. And then, wrap your head around who built that building, and what their practices are. Wrap your head around the fact that the person on the altar is the point of interaction of all of these things going on around it. So you as somebody in a pillar, it's not that you get nothing out of it, but unless if you're the person up at the altar, that's the person getting the most out of it. It's the difference between the outside of the coil and the inside of the coil. Right?
Yeah.
So all of these things are designed around the same exact principles, which is just wild to think. But the power is really there. And if you've ever been at one of these places and had an opportunity to go up to an altar and actually experience that, that it's inherently different. You could feel the difference in it.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, I'll say this: when you start removing and I don't want to get too much into this because we'll get in trouble. We can't get too much into religion things. So, but I'll just say this: when you remove the understanding you've been taught and the segregation between different ones, right? Then you start to realize that there's a information that flows through all of it. And then individual belief inside there can be removed from the equation. And that also means in certain points when they thought astronomy was something to be burned at the stake. And they thought that if you said that the Earth wasn't the center of the whole universe, then you get burned at the stake. And when you start to realize, well, what else did they tell you was wrong? Okay. Well, now you start to get into patterns and understanding, okay, these geometrical patterns, they started telling us they're all wrong. Well, are they right or are they still wrong? You get what I'm saying?
Oh, I do. I mean, directly tied in with that, like you were saying, with astronomy and the patterns and everything. You go into astrology,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, so when I'm born and where I'm born and what time I'm born and like the celestial makeup at the time of birth or conception, it's probably more likely the development through conception to the time of birth, like that whole time. That's the determining factors, right, of a lot of traits that you could suggest or more probable that you would have. Well, why would that be? Well, if you go back to when we talked about our energy to matter conversion, and how the structures organize themselves in different forms of, based on their environmental resonances and so on.
Yeah.
If whenever you're dealing with different star events and planetary events and planetary positions and all these things, it will directly have to do with how your cell structure develops in utero. And when you're ultimately born, there's said that your salts are fixed, like the salts of yourself, like things that you're made of, all that crystalline structure is set and hyper dependent on the environmental conditions that you're born into, celestial, at the celestial level. That's what they have to say about that. And, like, again, you take with it what you will, but that's the basis of it. It's not only just where the stars are in the sky and that's it. Like, it's what the stars and the planets and our planet is doing in context of it all at that moment in time, that actually has to do with your biological development while prior to even being born. And certain arrangements may be more prone to certain characteristics, which is how they ultimately break up. Like, oh yeah, you're one of these. Yeah, well then you're that, right? And more times than not, especially if you would do like your full astrological like calendar, based on all your specific criterias, you start to read it and you're like, man, this thing got my number. Like I've never had anybody that's honest with themselves read one of those detailed analyses like that and be like, yo, this didn't, this is way off or something. Like it's usually right on point, and most of the things that it's pointing out, like they're not the most common traits,
Well, it's like looking at ancient alchemy, right? And you start looking at the symbols. So one of the things you'll start to notice is astrology symbols, alchemy symbols, they all go together. Okay, that was probably an easy connection for most people. Then you start looking at an alchemy chart that's filled with fractals. But you're confused because every fractal that you know of doesn't look like that. Well, it might look like part of it, but it's not all of it. Until you realize that it's multiple fractals in that whole geometry of that actual part that's right there, then you start to realize something, that they actually understood it and they intertwined it, and it's a way to read it that you didn't read it before. Because again, alchemy has to be hidden throughout the ages. So you have to know which part you can combine with what in order to make this whole thing relevant again. It's not always, hey, A looks like this in this language and A looks like this in this language. Sometimes the A is written backwards. Sometimes it's upside down. Sometimes you have to read it with a mirror.
It's hard to write an A backwards.
Yeah,
a capital A at least.
Well, lowercase one, you can do it.
But
anyway,
did you know that that A upside down is like an oxet?
No.
Yep,
But
A upside down.
The point I was getting to was it's very simple for that. If you have to translate something, you have to know exactly what part you're looking into first. That's all I was trying to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. So. For sure. Language is no accident. and English in particular is definitely no accident. When English was developed as a language, it's a Germanic language that has its, root origin in Greek and Latin, with some French, plenty of French dabbled in there, but they picked the specific and most, original words, prefix and suffix combinations, that's why you have so many ways of nuance saying the same thing 100 different ways, slightly different. But that also goes to show that when people come on and blabber big words at 100 miles an hour, that, if, you could process the words that they're saying, you could, even if you don't know what the word is, you can break that down and figure out what exactly it means between the context and just the prefix suffix combination. It's a beautiful, unmistaken thing that's really not present as prevalently in any other language other than English. And sentence structure and everything like that, and none of it's by mistake. There were people that have known all of this very, very deep esoteric stuff for as long as people have been, but the getting it out there part has been the trouble, and then you look at things like I told you last week. I had just gotten back from Salem, Massachusetts, last week when we met, and they were straight up so paranoid over things that even like medical affliction was cause of hysteria.
Yeah.
Like just the fear that somebody being unwell was enough for them to start accusing people of being witches and so on and so forth. Like, but a lot of those people, like, too, they were practicing like basically like forms of alchemy is all it was, and they were, a lot of people were experimenting with like plants and their different effects and different horticultural and botanicals, and it's like witch's brew all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Didn't take
much.
Oh man, they wrote a book a while back, a long time ago, back in the medieval times, and it had to do with all these different plants and stuff, right? And I don't remember the name of the book, and it had a bunch of women in baths and stuff like that. And
sure, it was okay to talk about.
Yeah, it was not an improper book. Let me just say it that way. And it was basically talking about different plants and what herbal substances, stuff like that. We won't go that far into it. Anyway, I just look at it a matter of perspective. If you're on the surface of the earth, that wouldn't make a lot of sense to you. If you were, say, underground, then some of this plant life might be there. If you're in inner earth, you may have quite a bit of it there. And if it's written from the perspective of the person that's in the inner earth, then it would start to make a heck of a lot more sense.
And one of my favorite books goes into all that. Edidorpa.
Great. There you go. That's the exact book.
Yeah.
Or I think it's the right book. No.
No, not Edidorpa.
Edidorpa is the place in inner earth.
Well, no, Agartha is
Agartha.
Agartha. Edidorpa is a book. It's Aphrodite backwards. It's about, the man who did it. The man who did it was basically an apparition, who basically said he was going to spoil the word of the Freemasons. Well, they didn't call them the Freemasons, but said he was going to let the word out, and they kidnapped him and sent him into the middle of the earth where, he basically experienced all that reality is and fell to a pit where he couldn't fall anymore. And then, met at a door. Yeah. It's like, it's a very, like, read that book.
Okay.
I know you don't like to read, but read that, like, or listen to it or something, like, read that book.
Okay.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
I think I caught it on the YouTube when some guy read it. you know what I mean, or was reading excerpts from it, but I don't think I caught the whole thing.
Yeah, no, beyond it being a good story. It's just like it hits every level, but it hits every level. It's a good book.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, but everything's intertwined, man. And it's kind of cool when you look back on it and see what things, and then you have to look into the story of it, you know. Like, where is it in Japan? They have that rock that looks like it's suspended over water. And the guy said, I'll be back one day when, you know what I mean? Basically, when your technology is high enough that you can pull the energy out of the rock. And I always thought that was so interesting when you look at something like that, because then you go, okay, well, I could start up the piezoelectric in that rock fairly easy. You know what I mean? Is somebody going to pop out? Is there a genie in there? Because I'd love to know it. I'd love to talk to him. So
yeah,
I'm being facetious, but I'm just trying to say it would be interesting.
Yeah, I saw one thing the other day, and I mean, it's not really relevant, I guess, but it's super, super cool conceptually, because it's like the mechanical version of what makes the Graviflyer go, right? It's one of these tables, okay, that it's two separate pieces and it's held up by chain or string. Now,
It's a bad word.
What?
I hate the word string. I absolutely hate it.
Cord. How's that? Better?
Oh, because I get comments all the time. Did you bring your string today? You got your fishing string, Nathan? Are you going fishing today? Because you got a lot of string there.
Okay, so when you get, you're not going to hate the word in this context, though.
Okay,
so here's what it is. It's a base of a table, okay? And here, I'll draw it. Super easy. Cool. Okay, so it's a base and a top of a table like this, okay?
Okay.
And it's suspended by string. So how they do it is they put three pieces of, let's say chain, all right? Put three pieces of chain just connecting the top to the bottom plate, okay? And then in between those two pieces right there in the center, they have one other connecting there. But because they dip down lower than each other, it acts as a tensioner. So the thing's under a constant state of tension. So even though logically the thing should just collapse down to the ground because it's just simply made of chain, it's held together by that little offset. It's super cool and it's wildly stable for what it is. I'm like, yeah, that's really cool, because when you start pushing on the thing, it'll like rotate like a little bit, but it won't ever go out of whack, provided that it's tensioned properly. Really, really cool stuff. I'm like, man, I kind of want one.
Yeah, that does sound interesting.
And if you use like fishing line, won't say string. All right, if you use like fishing line and you do it, like it's kind of sort of invisible, so it looks like the top and the bottom are just like floating independently from one another. It's really wild.
Sorry, I even sold my fishing rods and everything else, man. I get so tired of hearing all that garbage. I got rid of all of it. I go, you know what? I'm so frustrating. It's like one of the things that bothers me so bad about it, it's not, hey, it doesn't fly yet, whatever. Dude, it's anti-gravity. It's not supposed to be, let's pick it up and have it done in 2 months. Okay? And I know that. So that part's fine. What bothers me is you always get, people just say, hey, does it fly? Does it fly? Well, did you even do any science? Did you even learn anything? Did you try and find anything in it? Like, if I tell you that there's harmonics in it, did you find it? If I tell you that the high voltage, you can get different effects by changing the high voltage from one thing to the next, right? To go from static electricity and then head over to high voltage where it sparks out. Did you do it? Did you learn it? Did you open your ears at that point? If I tell you the counter rotation in a magnetic field needs coupling, and the eddy current can be used as coupling, did you look at it, or did you just ask the question? Did it lift? See, that's what the part that bothers me. I don't care, so much about lifting. I want to learn. And with some of these projects, you know that they could be at the end just absolute garbage. And you go into that and you accept that fact and you don't make any wild claims about it. But did you learn something? Did you learn different things? Did you try to wrap your brain around it? Did you force anything you could into this to get an answer? Because when you do, special things happen. You see, I keep telling people about the frequency of the Tesla coil and putting the rod in the ground, and they could just roll their eyes. They go, it's just a Tesla coil. What are you going to do? You know, you're just going to get the frequency out of a Tesla coil. You're not going to get anything different. It doesn't do anything different. And then you go, well, as a matter of fact, I can use the earth as a capacitor when I take 2 Tesla coils and put a rod into the ground on both of them. Or I put the rod into the ground on the earth. It's actually pulling from that capacitor into my Tesla coil and make my voltage go higher. Then you go, oh, well, I guess you found something by experimenting on something that people think is a piece of junk. That's fairly interesting. And then you go, okay, what else did you find? Well, I could put the wire down the Tesla coil while attached to my gravity flyer, and then I could turn on a tuning fork without any problem, and you couldn't even get close to that. And you go, maybe I learned something. You know what I mean? Maybe there was something there. Okay? So I always tell people, you know, you want to take some of these experiments and push them to the limit because there's always something more there, something that you didn't know. Okay? Something that you just learn by doing it. Like, hey, did you know that they make a scalar field if you actually put this thing in the right area? If you understand that heat and the amps are on the same level, voltage and frequency are on the same level. So if I increase the frequency, do you know that my volts go up and my amps go down? Did you know that if you add heat in the system, my amps go up? Well, that's pretty strange, but I wouldn't have known that if I didn't do this. Oh, how about, have you ever seen a Tesla coil field rotating? Okay. No, we've never seen a Tesla coil rotate. Then how do you know the effects of it? Like, does any of this stuff peg your brain? Like,
I just want to be clear about one thing. When I said the thing about the strings, I was literally saying that, you know, like, because, you know, of the dual tension inside of this thing, keeping it suspended from one another.
Understand.
That's the context that I was saying that. I just want to be clear, because I mean, realistically, that's what you know, it is a dual tension. I wasn't saying anything about it.
No, look, I completely understand that it's not about that right now. I was just trying to say.
Yeah, no, I just didn't want you to take that the wrong way or something. Like, you know,
just the word I take the wrong way. So let me get back to where I was.
Sorry.
When you spin the Tesla coil and you basically put a wire, you don't even attach it to the Tesla coil, and you just run it down the throat and to each disc, and they're counter rotating, you know that you create a field that can hold in static electricity. Now, how in the world would you know that unless you did it? How would you know that you can hold in a scalar field? You see, these things are interesting, and you'd never know it unless you do the experiment. Now, somebody could tell you in physics, oh, well, that's not possible because you're just creating a radio tower when you create your Tesla coil. Well, that's because you don't understand experiments and you've never sat in my garage with me and felt it happen. Maybe then you might understand. I'm just saying, you know, there's correlations here that doing the experiment that I do shows all of them. Now, in the end, we'll see what it does. But I think that's so interesting. Like, for instance, you know, we start messing with these toroids and stuff, and we think, oh, we've reached the limit of where a toroid can put, you know, a magnetic field. No, you haven't. You're not even close. You know, oh, well, you can't wind wire to make it as strong as a magnet. Are you sure? I can wind it to be 10 times stronger than a magnet. So, you know, some of the stuff is build it. The best thing a physicist could do is come and sit in my garage with me and hang out and learn these things and then write every paper in the world about them. That guy would be like Nobel Prize worthy by the time he got done. So I always find that interesting. All right, I'm done with that. We can go back to your couple
Yeah,
of
no,
mushrooms.
no. Michael in the chat said something that
Go ahead.
that I've kind of brought up a couple of times, and I thought it was interesting. Anyway, he was saying that new and unexpected effects from part. Well, I can't read, man. I'm too far away. Um, new or unexpected effects are from a part you may not have fully understood. They heat the metal with the coil. You would know if you knew that before you made the coil. Okay. It made more sense when I read it than when I like in my head than when I read it out loud. But yeah, Laura, the geometry and the way that the coils are wrapped and everything like that, there's a method to that madness, and I think that the more time that goes on in what I'm observing of people's work and so on, the effects are becoming much more apparent, and therefore the size of the coils, the ratios of everything, the shape and geometry of the coils and everything is currently being adapted to really hone in on the particular effect that you're trying to drive out of the coil. Now, from what I'm kind of starting to see, especially with Gerald's coil and what Nathan presented the other day, which is kind of what I was speculatively saying all along. Now, mind people here, and I think people are fairly familiar with me at this point, but I don't build coils. Okay. At least not right now. I don't. I might down the road, when I get a little bit more established again. But right now, I don't build anything. I'm just a thought guy. Okay. But from the get-go, I said, look, if you do these geometries right and you know what you're going to put into it and you build it to what you're going to put in it, you should be, once you get it all in tune, you should be getting all the effects. It's not like just a one thing, it's, an all the effects thing, because, the way that I visualized it, that should just simply be the case, because there's an interconnection between, over unity energy, magnetic and gravitic effect, and different compressions depending on how the coil setups are and what they're putting out. So I think that at the earlier stages of what some people were doing, and maybe even some places where some people still are, even we show it because trying to give a platform to everybody to help people identify maybe where they're going wrong and help them through it or whatever. But, I think that it's more or less overcome at this point to a certain degree based on what I saw with Gerald's coils. Now, I mean, I'm very excited to see what tomorrow is. I think we all are. But I think that a lot of like the little hiccups and stuff, I think that a lot of those geometries and ratios and stuff have been worked out at this point, as far as I could tell, at least as a non-builder outsider that follows this pretty closely.
Yeah, by him. Let me just clarify that to everybody. He is the only one that I've ever seen that could do it. And I can't. I certainly can't do it. He's got a special way of doing things that is just different. And I think that's absolutely amazing. And I can't wait to see it. That's just, I don't know that he's giving out the secret sauce, but I'm going to tell you, he's probably telling you how this thing works and probably verifying exactly what I was saying here today. And
well, with all the information that we discuss constantly, and I don't want to anticipate what he is or isn't going to say, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that with all the knowledge that's in this group and everything that's been discussed, if you've been following it closely enough, if he doesn't give you the secret sauce and he gives you 85% of it, the 15% that's missing has already probably been spoken about at length at various times throughout it all. So if he presents something, people, and it's missing it, figure out what he didn't talk about and go back and figure it out yourself, because I would put my safe bet on the fact that it's all been talked about at this point.
Yeah. Well,
it's got to be put into a neat package. That's it.
Yeah, you could be right, but I don't know. It's not as easy as I would think it would be. I'll just say that. And
Fair.
I do think the understanding is that easy, though, of what it's doing, where it goes, things like that. That whole part is fairly easy to put together. You know what I mean? It's how he gets there is the hard part. So, yeah, I think all that other stuff is so much easier, especially when you research it. Oh my God, it's so right in your face. It's not even funny. It's like one thing after another, and they all fit in place. And I feel like I'm reading hieroglyphs that were just written in English when I look at it. Is what I feel like. And it's like, didn't you know that? Didn't you know that? I knew that. Did you not know that? Like, I do that with the hieroglyphs too. When I start to read them in Egypt, it's the same thing. You know what I mean? You want to see the Aken? Well, that's the symbol of resonance. I could tell you 10 ways from Sunday I can prove it. Okay? But then you start looking and you go, okay, well, you're sitting there with tuning forks. Well, we know the tuning forks are low frequency, and you're saying you got some other kind of effect out of it? Okay. Well, wow. How did you get your thing that looks like a Tesla coil to actually get in that low frequency to be the same as your tuning fork? Well, hey, that fat old man went outside and he did his gravity fire test and he found out. And that's how I know. Okay. It's all kinds of things like that, man. It'll blow your mind when you start looking back at these things. Yeah. Just total mind blown. And then you go, wow, how did I not read that on the wall? How did I not see it all in combination with the next thing? And it's right there. I mean, it's literally right there. And I guess it's the new age, man, that you start to see the Knights Templar come out and start talking about this kind of stuff now. Buddy, there's a reason why they're coming out and talking about it right now.
Are they?
Because we're hitting right on it and they know it. And that secret.
I mean, are they I know that you said that they've reached out to you, but are they talking about it publicly? Because
yes.
I haven't. Yeah.
They're leaving videos all over YouTube about it. And they're starting to talk about what things are and what's going on. And I'm going to tell you, we've seen the science community start to, how do I say this? Nobody would talk about any of this kind of stuff. About several months ago, we started coming in and talking about it. And then everybody else started talking about it. The difference is we know what's going on. And they're still trying to pick up the pieces because they're trying to take the actual scientific way things are said and apply it to what we're doing instead of applying what we're doing to find something else, you know what I mean? Or build a whole new mathematical formula to it because we weren't in left field when we wrote it. So that's going to be the big thing there. And by the way, let me just say this. I think they gave the whole physics thing to AI people. What they should have done and what they would be smart to do is use the things like that the right way. So if I came out with a database to put every single theory right here, that accepted theory, I put I don't know theory and absolutely not theory. And you put all of them in there and you create a database, right? Then I can search that database based on the experiment that I'm working on in order to find the theory that fits it. Then you can check the math based on the two different theories that you put together and see if it starts to equal out and it's right. Okay. That's pretty simple. Just put them all in a database so that we don't have to search for them. Use keywords in order to find them. Now, the other side of that is let's put all the experiments on the other side of that. So now we put all these experiments in there. We have several different theories that might fit that experiment. Let's connect those together. What you're going to find is a very simple way of looking at things. You have experiments, you have theories. You have theories that can be proven by the experiments. Now we're equaling the right way in all of our physics formulas. We are not getting too far ahead with math and too far behind on the experiment. But we're matching them up, okay? This is what they should have as a database with AI. AI should not be thinking for you. You put it in there, it finds it for you. That's its job. Its job is not to think for you. Okay.
Right. An advanced search engine is what it really is. I mean,
if you start telling me about ChatGPT, telling me how my thing's working, okay, I'll read that when I'm doing number 2, okay? Because that's about what it's worth. If you told me you looked it up in a database full of all this information, hey, I'm good with it. Let's go with it. Because there's certain theories that match certain things that are going on, and we don't know it yet. And it's because they don't get combined very often. So I'm just saying there should be the right database out there. And anybody that thinks that they can use AI to think for them, I'm sorry, you're 10 times smarter than that thing will ever be.
Yeah, like it's like anything else in the world. You could use it as a tool, or you could use it as a crutch. And if you use it as a crutch, you're going to put your weight on it, it's going to break, and you're not going to know why. It's I've integrated AI into my life a little bit, in ways that I've found personally beneficial, and I see how other people kind of use them, you know, and it's so much different than how I use it. And I find that to be fascinating, like sometimes I have like a little bit of a, like just a preponderance, and it's like, let me ask it and see what it says. Now, nothing it's ever going to tell me, I'm going to go, this is factual, good information. This is what it is. Not even a thought in my head. I look to see what the response is and see what it inspires in me to ask another question. And maybe I'll have a couple of exchanges with it just to see where it's at. And then what do? I ditch it. I pull open a search engine or two, and then I'll start doing my own independent side of things, to start weeding through more good and bad information on the subject that now has direction because AI was able to provide that, or at least a path, of questioning that maybe I want to explore. That's on the information side of things. On the art side of things, I think that AI generally makes pretty horrendous art because it all kind of looks the same. Now, it's good for certain applications. If you're looking for a thumbnail, it's great. If you're looking for, but I'm talking about like in the fine art side of things. There's been times where I've just had these ideas of things that I want to like paint or do, and like I could kind of see it in my head, but every time it's going onto paper, it's just not doing it right. It's like not the right composition, or something's a little off about it. So what I'll often do is I'll start to play with the AI photo generators and stuff for compositional purposes and whatnot, just to see how it lays things out. And then, I'll take little tidbits of ideas that it kind of brings to the table through maybe several different images, and then decide, okay, now I'm going to bring this all together into one thing that's going to be my piece that I'm going to work on, and then now it's all my own. It's not stuff I'm copying, or just crutching on. And then the music generation, it's like I like to write lyrics, but I had to get rid of my bass 2 years ago. I haven't been playing, and I haven't played in a band since I'm a teenager, So like, what am I doing with that part of myself that I like, but I don't really have any meaningful way to express it? Well, what do? I'll write the lyrics, and then I'll try to bring in some, AI music composition to it. And, maybe further down the line, I'll start editing some of that because that's within my means to do, where it's more than mine. So it's a good form. It's a good thing to put you on the path of inspiration, it's a good way to make something where maybe there would otherwise just be nothing. It'd just be, so lyrics that you jotted on a napkin and threw in your drawer and never did anything with, so it's good in those ways, but people thinking that you're going to ask it and get something definitive, ask it and it's all knowing and, infallible, and, or just being like, I'm an artist because I typed in a prompt and this is exactly what it produced, or something like that. Like, that's a misuse of it. And frankly, there's no flavor or humanity to it either. So, you take with it what you will, but there's definitely a good way to embrace and use it as a tool where it could be helpful, as long as you don't allow it to misguide you by doing your own due diligence.
No, I agree with you as far as an artistic thing. Absolutely awesome. Okay, I'm not disagreeing with that. Thumbnails, music, things like that. I was talking more of when you get into hardcore physics and stuff, I prefer a database versus AI. That's all I'm saying, because that stuff is pretty much cut and dry. The math is what it is, and all the theories that they have out there, it already know. And I'll say this to everybody out there: just remember, it says theory. It does not say proven fact. It says theory. Now, some things could be proven fact, and I'll accept that if you could prove it to me, and not the same way that you try to prove your religion to me. Okay, you better have something that actually shows it, and it's some kind of experiment that shows it, and I'll believe it. Then we're good. Okay, but yeah, I agree with you. For music generation, stuff like that, I think it's awesome. But like for instance, I have Google in my house, so I'll do cooking and stuff. Hey Google, what's the temperature of this? You know what I mean? Perfect for me. I like to research things, so then it pops up the right answer, right? Or it'll tell me. But I don't ask it how to make the dish.
Well, don't ever let Google tell you to cook pork to 165, because it's a travesty.
It's 145, isn't it?
Yeah, whatever it is. I don't know. I like it at like around 140, where it's still nice and lush. But
yeah, whatever. I think it's 145 and it's done. It's still pink and moist on the inside, and you still got flavor in there. At 165 or 175, it becomes hard, and it's like a piece of
but
rubber.
they used to tell you to cook it to that temperature right on the packaging, which I never followed. I mean, man, I've been a cook my entire life, so yeah, it's a tale for another day.
Yeah. I like learning the old barbecue stuff from people who've done it like forever. You go down and you sit with the barbecue guy while he's doing it, and he tells you all the little neat tricks and things like that. Some of the favorite times in the world, right there.
Man, I'm that guy. Like, I really hate talking about myself, like in this shit I do. Like, I'd rather just talk about like I think this or I think that. But man, like if I'm gonna give myself credit for anything, I was going to quit a 6-figure job to just open up my own little thing at one point, and cook, because that's what I enjoy doing the most. And there's nothing I don't make. But yeah, doing the barbecue stuff, man, that's like where my heart's always been, because it's like, it's an event, Yeah. And I do a ham every Christmas. I cure the ham myself, 7 days in advance. I'm sitting there making a pink salt brine, injecting it, sitting in the fridge for a week, or actually 2 weeks now that I'm thinking about it, depending. Sometimes it's a full size 30-pounder, whatever. Mm-hmm. It's sitting there for like almost 14 days. And then it's got to be on the smoker for like 16 hours. And then it's got to glaze out, it's an event.
Yeah, it is.
That. I'm making my own pastrami and, every kind of pork and chicken. It's endless. Brisket, like I mess with brisket, but then I end up
2 days
with all this brisket, and it, I'm only me. So
I love cherry wood for brisket, because the smoke ring looks so much nicer. It gets that nice red color that you want in there. So I know everybody has their own favorite wood for it, but I like that one.
I like a mix though, like I lived in Texas for a while, man. They like to dump mesquite on briskets and shit. Like, for me, I don't know. It's a little too much of a bite, like to mesquite. But I like oak with a nice mix of cherry, pecan, apple, whatever I got. Sometimes these days, what I'll even do is I'll get an oak fire going, and rather than even use big amounts of charcoal or anything like that, I'll add a little charcoal just to kind of keep the heat, add oak to it, and then to get the oak fire. But I'll just buy like a bag of like mixed pellets, and I'll just throw handfuls of pellets in. Sometimes I'll even wet them and then let them dry just so it turns to dust, just so I could periodically throw like a little puff of like fruit wood smoke up there. But
Hmm.
you know, it's a
What I
science.
what I like to do with my chicken and stuff is I'll put the grill marks on it and run everything on high just real quick. Put the grill marks on it. Take the chick. It's a 4-burner grill, so you take the 2 outside ones, leave them high. Turn off the ones on the inside. Now you're building a convection oven. So now it's going to go like this around all of the meat, right? So,
Mhm.
but the main part is in the center, so there's no heat directly under it, so you're not burning it. But what it does, it keeps that moisture in there, but it cooks it, in a nice fashion, and you get that beautiful taste out of it from the
Mhm.
barbecue, but you're not getting it overcooked like where it's rubber. So
Yeah,
I
that's
do
the way.
that with the steak as well.
Yeah.
And then you have to make sure you break down a little bit of the steak before you start to cook it so that when it comes off the grill, it just falls apart. Like not all the way fall apart because you still want a little bit of tug there, but in your mouth, it's like it's not
Oh,
hard to chew.
oh, I know what you mean. Yeah, I remember when I started like doing sous vide cooking before like they even had circulators for like the residential, market and stuff. Like I just saw a guy that's like, ever cook a steak in a bag? And I'm like, no. you know,
Yeah.
and I was like just heating up a pot of water with the thermometer, like, let's get this puppy to like 133, 134 and see what she does, in a Ziploc bag. And I'm like, man, that's the best steak I've ever had in my life. You know what I mean? Coming out of a plastic bag. All you got to do is let it cool, give it a sear, and done deal. And man, I was sold on that idea. And I did that for a long time with my like red meats and stuff, just because like it's so foolproof. Then I got out of control with it. And I was doing like a 20-pound rib roast and stuff like that. But, you know,
Oh, I was making ribs not too long ago. And you get in there the unsalted butter or sweet butter, and you give it a little bit of that, man. I know a lot of people just like it with a little bit of tang to it or something like that on their barbecue sauce. I kind of like the sweet stuff. So that right there is a beautiful thing to add when you go and you wrap your ribs. You add a little bit of that sweet butter to it, and it gives it just a much better taste. To me, anyway, it's a little sweeter than most people would like. But that with your barbecue sauce, a little bit of honey in there, you know what I mean? You could never go wrong.
no, I dig, man. And I do it all from scratch too. So it's like, all right. But aside, I said I wasn't going down that hole. But nonetheless, there we were. Yeah, man. It's so to go back to Montauk, because that's what we were
Okay, let's go.
talking
Let's
about.
do it.
Believe that. I'm a little torn because like I always felt like if you live out by me, you always know some like old school guys that have been out here forever, you know. And I mean, like the Hamptons they're only like 15 miles from me. So, the reach of that radar tower and stuff far exceeds where I am and beyond.
Okay.
And they said growing up with CRT TVs and antennas and stuff like that, um, that every 7 seconds or so, their TV would like the screen and the sound would tick from any time that radar was on.
Oh, really?
And I couldn't pinpoint exactly when like it stopped, so to speak. But they reported that as being a thing supposedly well after the entire base was defunct. Because they denied operations out of that base for like a number of years after the Air Force got out of there. It was supposedly just decommissioned. It was still blocked off. They didn't make it into a park until years and years later.
Hmm.
And that's supposedly when the experiments were going on there. But what threw me for a loop is that I think that the radar itself, by and large, was more of just like a front for what was going on. I don't think the radar itself really had all too much, if anything, to really do with what they were doing. I think that radar just needed the types of power generation needs, that whatever they were doing down under required.
Hmm.
That's
Okay.
what I personally think. Um, You know, it's a really crazy thing, man, because like they really, if they did what was reported, I mean, they've really, you know, abused people, which is not shocking because I mean, if you look at declassified stuff from MK Ultra and whatnot, you knew they were doping people with LSD, you know, without them knowing. Imagine starting to trip out when you're just totally fine, and you know, like you're going about your day, and all of a sudden you're tripping out, like
Dude,
that
the
can't be
government
okay.
did a lot of brutal stuff, man, to people, and they didn't admit it for a long time.
Yeah. And if that's what they're telling you, I'd hate to know what the worst of it is. Because I don't think anybody's finding that out anytime soon. You know, it's crazy stuff. Do I think that, you know, they were playing with time and stuff down there? I do. Do I think that it was like Al Bielek reported and Duncan Cameron and the guy that I always forget his name? You know, no, I don't think it was like to that level of crazy, but I think it was so close that they really only had to put a cherry on top of that sundae to make it so unbelievable that they could tell the truth in plain sight.
Oh yeah.
That's what I tend to believe. There's too many people out here that fall right into that whole like, yeah, there was always like we always knew something was going on there while it was going on. Like it's one thing to come up with like a whole story after the fact about something like the book suggests, but this stuff was talked about way before that, you know. And you know, the one thing that I had mentioned, you know, previously that I found super interesting is that where I live is right next to a park, you know, and the park was supposedly the location of a UFO crash back in like, you know, the 90s, maybe like 92 or 3, something like that. And you know, apparently there's all sorts of people that said the fire department, the local fire department was here, you know, that there was like clearly an electrical fire going on or something like that because it wasn't like flames, it was like blue glow stuff going on, like just like right off of a major roadway and stuff. So they called it in and they go in, and next thing you know, people from the lab came and turned everybody away and said, get out of here, get lost. All the houses were evacuated. The park personnel and stuff, who the people in the community and everything knew well, because, you know, it's like the park right here. They were all talking to everybody. Yeah, no, they told us we all had to get out and this, that. And then people tried to like talk to them about the incident after it reopened, like maybe a week or two later. Like, hey, well, what happened there? Like, what's going on? And literally the person was like, what are you talking about? You know, and had to be like that. I guess, you know, like nobody ever talked about it. Like, no, what are you talking? Nothing happened. There was no fire. Nobody was here. You know, someone got to him or something. Something happened. But it wasn't like you know, some kind of like conspiracy thing. Like the people in this neighborhood will tell you, no, something happened. It was all over the news.
Yeah.
Yet they blatantly deny it. They say nothing happened at all.
Well, you know, out of some of these secret labs, man, there's always something that comes out you didn't realize was the thing until it is. You know what I mean? Gene splicing or something like that. And then you start to understand, well, maybe they did something to figure that out. You know, that would be common sense, wouldn't it? So some of these things rolling up on shore that you didn't expect, well, maybe there's a reason for it. You know, now looking back on it, now that we have all the right facts of how things work, you go, oh, okay. And then it always gets me. There's always a story when they have this about homeless people being taken and stuff done to them. And it's like, well, they don't do that now. I can tell you that. I live in California. There's a lot of them out there, but they do all act like they're on some kind of a drug. That's for sure. I've seen a lot of that go on. So that's kind of different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you got to remember, like, we was talking about Brookhaven before. We were talking about Tesla, Wardenclyffe, how these connections, at least I made them. By the way, I've been researching this subject matter for what year is it? 24? Since like 2006, 7.
Wow.
Okay. I've never come across a resource that has ever had this presentation. Okay. Of the players, the movement, the connections. I've heard all unimaginable things said. Okay. But this presentation from the beginning of this video has never been in one resource that I've ever seen. Okay. I've heard little bits of it here or there, never full connection, never in one place. But one thing I'll throw out there, okay, mind you how a particle accelerator works, okay, by utilizing large magnetic fields through coils, okay, and accelerating a particle around and around, okay, and then when they're ready to do the collision, what they do is they bring the field inwards into a confined space that progressively narrows the bandwidth spectrum that could possibly pass through that, eliminating out other particles, just leaving the one frequency of particle remaining by the time it's ready to collide. And it does so in a reverse fashion. Okay. Aside from what I touched on earlier about a forced Casimir effect through that very process in itself, which is just a whole other realm of stuff to be talked about another day. Brookhaven National Laboratory tested its first nuclear reactor in 1947, but had its first collider. Its first collider was in 1952.
Wow.
Okay, so this is what the timeline realistically looks like. And if you could, the particle accelerators, I don't know what the first one was, but guess what? It wasn't much before then, if at all. I know they were messing. They basically created a particle accelerator. When they discovered fission, that's how they discovered fission. It was just super small scale. I think that this might have been one of the first large scale colliders like this. And the reason is because the technology of the coils that they were using wasn't even available at that time until when? After 1943, when Tesla died. They needed to get the lab set up. They needed to get the program set up. They had to get the theoretics of the systems in order for them to take 9 years then it was operational by then. So probably took like 7 years for them to both get the property, get set up, get the technology in order, and actually build this thing, which is not an unreasonable or unthinkable timeline. And the technology just didn't drop out of the clouds.
Yeah.
So, or maybe it did. Maybe it dropped out of the cloud. When that happened, 42, was that Roswell, or 43?
Yeah.
It was in there.
Yeah. You know what? I'd love
46,
to see
45,
UFO, man. Love to see that.
47 was Roswell.
47. Right when we came out with radar and stuff, they started crashing. That's crazy, huh? When we started testing radar, put frequencies in the skies they weren't used to, resonated them right out of the sky. Now they emitted to, we can pinpoint this airplane up there. We could just resonate it and it'll come down. Oh, that's pretty interesting. Really? You knew that, huh? Was that from the 40s when you learned that? Because that's when it did.
Well, we knew it was by the 80s because Bearden was talking about it like it was old news by 84 or 5.
Yeah. So that's always interesting. It always comes out in the end what they did, but they knew how to do it, and they knew how to take them down. So, and they probably knew that average bullets wouldn't do it, and that it's just a completely different system. So, yeah. It's kind of crazy. All right, Joe, it's been about 2 hours.
Yes, sir.
We learned a lot.
Well, for anybody who might have joined late or anything like that, yes, we talked about all sorts of different regular off-topic things today, but I highly suggest and recommend that you go back to the beginning of this video if you missed it and watch it, just because I think that some of the things that I had found when kind of digging a little bit deeper into this was super fascinating, connects a lot of dots, is relevant to not only what we're doing here in this group, but also relevant to like world events by large right now, has crazy and sort of eerie connections. So, if you've missed it, I definitely think going back would not be a bad idea. And thanks for having me as always, Nathan.
Yeah, I'm going to leave real quick before we do anything. I'm going to leave Gerald's channel in the description just so everybody doesn't miss that presentation tomorrow, because we're all excited about it. So, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Super excited for that presentation. Definitely don't miss that. I'm going pumpkin picking with my family tomorrow, and I'm genuinely hoping, because I don't make my own schedule all the time, that I'm able to catch it live. And if not, then, catch it on the back end. But, nonetheless, thank you, everybody, as always. I'm always very humbled to be, featured in such a group of great minds. So thank you.
Well, thank you for all the compliments, Joe. It's always nice to have you on. We all take a trip somewhere. You know what I mean? Different projects, different things. We all learn a whole bunch. And I really appreciate you having you on. Anyway, guys, thank you in the chat. Thank you for everything. Have yourself a great day.
All right. Peace and love.